It's Wednesday, February 1st, 2023, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my Missouri School of Journalism colleagues, Damon Kiesow and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, retraining journalists who cover car crashes to move away from police reports, which tend to blame drivers, and to look more closely at other factors, such as the design and conditions of the roads and the driver's vehicle. Don't want to pay for the New York Times, The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and The Telegraph? Well, we'll tell you about a new app that's creating a single subscription model, and why the Associated Press apologized to the French. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before our half hour is up today, but we're going to start with the big story gripping the nation this week, Friday night's timed release of the body cam video showing the horrific beating which led to Tyre Nichols' death in Memphis. This is a highly sensitive topic, and we understand if you decide today's show might not be for you. To our online and social media audience, we're not going to be showing the video during this program, but we're going to be talking about it, and we're going to be talking about why others showed it the way they did, such as MSNBC and Fox and most of the other networks which screened the video, made some edits to it, and CNN, which ran it uncut and in full as it was released, saying that it was going to help build understanding.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one, and this is something that comes up pretty much every time you have an incident like this. You have editors, you have producers, you have even reporters themselves having to make decisions as to how much they want to show, when they want to show it, and how they're going to frame it before they show it. And so this was a process that each one of these networks had to make a decision on, and you know, CNN went the full route because they felt like that was the best way to provide those who are watching the context that they needed in order to make a determination as to what they thought about what it was they were seeing. And you had the others who said, no, we're gonna talk a little bit about it, we're gonna play pieces of it, then we're gonna talk a little bit more, provide some more information. A lot of it is just conversation around understanding who your audience is, what do you want to convey, and how you want to convey it.
So in making some of those decisions, is there a right answer? Is there a wrong answer? How do you arrive at what to do? I mean, at least in this case, they knew exactly when the video was coming, so they could formulate a plan and know how to approach it.
Yeah. So I'd preface it by saying I haven't watched these videos largely since like Danny Pearl in 2002. That was before we really knew sort of the impact of seeing like a death or like that on video. I think Ernest is right. There's no particularly right or wrong answer. It's all about the context and how you're presenting it. I would just sort of say back in 2002, online wasn't the dominant sort of, or social wasn't the dominant carrier of these things. Broadcast was the only place you could maybe see them. There's a little less need to show the full video nowadays when people can find it in so many other places.
Well, you raise another good point, too, because you bring up Danny Pearl in 2002. I was thinking of this also going back to 9/11 and working as a TV news producer. We had shown the video of the planes going into the buildings, and we reached a point where even after 2 or 3 days, there was a decision made to retire that video permanently. That there was no longer any news value in showing it. It was simply wallpaper to be putting up on the screen. By that point, everybody who wanted or needed to see it had, and we weren't providing any kind of service to our audiences. And retiring a video clip like that in 2001, in 2002, even up to say 2010, it's very easy to do. The internet prevents that from happening now. Even if a TV station decides to never run that video again after the initial showing of it in the context being built, it's on the internet forever.
No, that's true. I mean, when you said that, I went back in, at least in my Wayback Machine, to Rodney King. And being a reporter at the time that actually covered the aftermath of the verdict of that trial, and how that that incident, Rodney King's beating at the hands of police officers, was played over and over and over again, and in fact has been played over and over again in this particular incident involving Tyree. You're still seeing that clip. So I think it depends on what clip you're talking about or what piece of news you're talking about as to whether or not it has a shelf life or it can be sort of archived, never to be shown again.
Yeah.
It depends on this. It depends on the story and it depends on the event.
Yeah. And that's definitely changed even the past 5 years as we've seen more videos of exactly this type of incident. Rodney King, one of the first ones that was broadcast that got into that
And
heavy
only
rotation.
because somebody actually had a video camera
Right,
out.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the technology has caught up
Right.
with this movement. But even going back to 2001 again, this goes to photos as well. The people falling off the trade centers. Those photos moved on the wire the first day. They were published the first day. Since then, fairly much no visuals of those being published, like in a national publication. So we make these decisions, and it's always contextual. It's always what's right today and how does it change tomorrow. There is no right answer.
So one of the questions that came up on Fox's The Five, Brian Kilmeade demanded that in the coverage, there also be an opportunity for the police officers to provide their perspective, that their story and their side needed to be told. And one of the people who was on set with him said, and I think it's a very fair question, the video was a body cam video. Is that not actually their side if the camera is on their person?
Yeah, I mean, when you shared this piece with me, I'm going like, what's your point? I mean, they had the body cam and they had the overhead, which was also provided by the police department to see what's going on out on the streets.
Yeah.
If that's not your side, what else is? And in fact, when the police department itself made the decision, not only are we going to fire these officers, we're going to work with the prosecutors to charge them, and we're going to break up this unit. What other side are you looking for?
Right.
Unless it's the individual police officers to give them an opportunity. They have defense lawyers.
They have defense lawyers who basically telling them, you have the right to remain silent. I think you need to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
There's always apologists looking for extenuating circumstances, saying, oh, what happened before the video started?
Sure.
That was not nearly the case in this instance.
No, it wasn't. But it does bring us back to that question that we have over and over and over again of the idea of both sides journalism, and that we are past that point of there being, because there isn't always that side.
Right.
I'm pointing to a different direction.
No, I think you're right. I think we've gone past that. It's and actually, there was never this both sidesism. I mean, I think that's another one of the myths that, along with objectivity and all the others that crop up whenever we have these conversations. Yeah. It is, what are the facts? What are the facts? What can you show? What can you prove? Okay, and who's speaking and who's choosing not to speak, and who's given voice and who's not given voice. And what you're finding, I think, especially in the age of social media, is that you have way more voices in the conversation now, because if those in the mainstream media and the legacy media don't give you a voice, you can create your own voice and you can get that out there. And I think that's what we're still struggling with, that as a part of the legacy media. And until until the legacy media makes a decision that it's going to start including a lot more voices, you can continue to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So, Damon, you're here with us today, sitting in for Kathy Kiley, who couldn't be here with us. So we often talk, and Earnest is the first to say, when did communities ever trust journalists? There was never any trust. But you sent me an interesting opinion piece that we added to the Links blog that said the key for journalists to build trust with audiences is to drop that objectivity, and now's the time to do it.
Drop the performative objectivity where it really isn't objectivity. I think that, to go back to the Memphis case real quick, the reason both sidesism can't be applied in this case is because there's video, because of social media, because people can talk about it, share it, and not have it be gate-kept, and wait till court or something like that. The problem in that CJR piece, really the argument was there's always been an objectivity, but who controls it is the question. And we're saying it needs to be democratized, basically.
Newspapers have traditionally been a unifying voice in troubled times. The editorial and opinion pages are that place that the newspaper can begin to bring everybody together, create a call for calm, to set agendas, to hold lawmakers and governments accountable for change. Something that was interesting in the past few days here is that there have not been any editorials about this in the Memphis Commercial Appeal. And that is in part because of a corporate policy change at the Gannett local newspapers. It went back to 2019 that did away with local editorials from the editorial board.
Yeah.
You had mentioned, Damon, some interesting observations in the paper even today.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a national trend where opinion pieces in local media are seen as divisive or controversial among certain populations. I don't 100% agree with that position. I understand the argument to some extent, but this is a perfect example. A local issue where you have experts in the room who should and could have something to say important on the issue to bring the community together, or at least frame the issue in a specific way. And they've given up that voice to some extent.
Well, I mean, I think part of this also goes to the fact that as you have more and more the corporatization of local journalism, and we've talked about that on the show a lot, they are looking at it more from that standpoint as opposed to we are part of the community. Now, they'll say we're part of the community when it fits into our economic mission.
Or our branding
or our
statement.
Branding statement.
Or
yeah,
our
exactly.
ability to get you to subscribe.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
But when it comes to issues like this, we're kind of hands off, and when we fall back on, well, that was a corporate decision that we don't do editorials anymore, not just in this newspaper, but in all of the newspapers that are owned by the corporation.
And to your earlier question, it is a corporate decision, and it's also driven by the fact that the Commercial Appeal today was a 16-page paper, I think. There's no ads on editorial pages.
So that's interesting. Yeah. Let's also put that into context. I know that as an editor, anytime somebody throws a number at me, my first question is that a little or a lot? Right. So for our audience, as you point out, 16 pages for the newspaper, for a city the size of Memphis,
small.
It's a very small paper. That's good.
No, I mean, you're right. It is small, but they've been sort of moving in this direction, not just Memphis, but a lot, especially Gannett. Yep. A lot of their newspapers have been moving in this direction, moving more online and trying to get their digital subscriptions up. And one of the ways that they're going about doing that is to have fewer and fewer editions of the print paper and fewer stories on the print paper to say and trying to drive that traffic online.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And to be fair to Gannett, to some extent, the statements they released like this week on this are a little murky. Like I couldn't quite make heads or tails of it exactly, but they are, which I would favor getting rid of, especially national syndicated opinion pieces. If you're going to do opinion in a local paper, make it be local opinion.
Yeah. Going back to the video itself, I had said at the top of the show today, this is traumatic to watch, to discuss, and to cover. And that's something too. There have been a lot of pieces, the Commercial Appeal a lot of papers, the Commercial Appeal among them, different TV stations in their coverage, providing people with the public service journalism as well of how can you cull your feeds to take certain keywords out so that if you don't want to see it shared with you, how can you do that on each platform? How can you engage in self-care? How can you get help? And the idea that that the secondary trauma is real in watching this as well.
Well, I mean, and to a certain extent, I agree with that. Okay. But also, I mean, one of the things I would say is that you can take that a little bit too far to where you're not really informing certain parts of your audience that really need to know about this, in particular those who aren't impacted by it. They may see the video, they may hear some of the commentary if they're plugging into the talk shows on cable and that sort of thing. I would say that the local news organizations, be they local television or the newspaper or any digital outlets that are there, I think it's really incumbent upon them to try to speak to the various audiences within these communities so they understand how in this particular case, the African American community is traumatized by what's happened, and their understanding of, yes, this was one horrific event on top of many other horrific events.
How many horrific events have been there since Friday night that it's one on top of?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a series of events, but you don't have to show the video for people to necessarily understand that. It also involves avoiding passive language when we're reporting on it.
Right.
Like being very clear what happened and
calling it what it is.
Calling what it is, using very plain language to describe it in every story.
I want to talk about a couple of other things today, too, in the time that we have left. And our next topic centers around an interesting training that I was reading about yesterday in the Columbia Journalism Review. And you can read about it on our links blog as well. The World Health Organization brought together a group of journalists in Kuala Lumpur to teach them more about how they could be reporting on automobile crashes as a public health crisis. And the main theme of this training is that journalists need to break that very bad habit, and we've been talking about this again for years, of simply taking a police report, ripping it, reading it, and taking whatever attribution police give to the how, where, and why the incident happened, but to actually reframe that coverage and to look at some of the other aspects, such as road design, as the design of vehicles. And Damon, I really wanted to talk to you about this as our design thinker on our faculty, and the one who really puts us in a position of thinking about how are the structures that we build leading to outcomes that maybe we aren't always reporting on fully.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that piece because it's looking at the problem from a systems perspective. It's not just it was raining today or somebody was sleepy. It's, there was too much parking on the road, visibility was bad, couldn't see a pedestrian, couldn't see this, whatever.
A curve was too steep of an angle.
And this applies to more, and this wasn't covered in that piece, this applies to more than just vehicular on vehicle accidents. It's pedestrian deaths, it's all that sort of infrastructure. And I saw an interesting piece 2 days ago, I think it was in France, where it's safer to walk in the roads because they have less on-street parking. It's made for people, it's not made for cars. So we cover, and journalism falls for this all the time, we cover events, we don't cover systems so well.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you could actually go back to, think about had the horrific beating in Memphis happened without the video, or George Floyd happened without without the person being there having their phone out taking that. Yep. You would have gotten the straight police report.
Which
in
is
most
what we
cases,
got for how many weeks?
Exactly, especially in George Floyd. Yes. And even though that's what the police were putting out, everyone on social media was seeing exactly what took place. And so that's the kind of coverage that we get on a daily basis around, and it is a system thing. It is the way in which journalists are trained to cover. And because it is real easy, and we talk about this, it's real easy to go to the police department. You don't even have to go to the police department now. They'll send it to you. They'll email it to you.
And in some cases, they're just posting it on their website.
They're posting it on the website. There you go. And they get it. But it's all from their perspective.
Right.
And if you aren't taking the time to question that, and then go out and get the information, and then think about it from the perspective of those who are being impacted by it, then that's what you're going to get. And the same thing happens when you talk about a car crash. It's a whole lot easier to take that police report where the police are saying, well, if the person driving had done this, the accident wouldn't have happened. Well, what if they did do that and it's still...
In Earnest, as I was also reading through that, I was thinking about a lot of the conversations, and forgive me for telling tales out of school, but I've been thinking about a lot of the conversations you and Kathy and I have been having around the table before we start recording the show in the past few weeks about, our infrastructure problems just in our nation alone, and how over the course of the last 2, 3, 4 decades, the infrastructure has collapsed in this country. So as we also talk about, that person swerved and went into the wrong lane of traffic. Well, they maybe have swerved because there was an 8-foot pothole that hadn't been fixed or repaired because there was no money to do so, and they overcorrected. That's not their fault. I mean, it is their fault, but it's not their fault.
Or they driving in the driving lane that was built for cars that were made in the 19th.
So we call these normal accidents, quote unquote normal accidents, which is an unfortunate or a tragedy that happens, but it's been designed into the system to happen, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ernest, this next topic I brought back this week because you told me you were disappointed it didn't make it into the script last week.
Okay.
So I'm bringing it back.
Okay.
Because it's really that good. And frankly, it was another one, Damon, that it's about something you and I have talked about in the past. Maybe it was even longer than that. We had this idea when Starbucks announced it wasn't going to sell newspapers anymore, that what they should do is work with major publications to develop an app that got readers around those publications' paywalls, but that they could only use it while physically in Starbucks. We all thought it was a brilliant idea when we talked about it. It would be like an all-access app with a single entry point, and if necessary, a single payment. Sounds like there's this app coming together in Europe called Informed that is doing just that.
Well, we could definitely use it. I mean, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. I mean, so you got a lot of people running around saying, can I just go back to basic cable? Because you got all these streaming services and you only want to watch 2 or 3 shows on one streaming service, but you got to pay $9.99 and you get all this other stuff. And the news services are the same way. You have one section in the New York Times that you like, but you've got to get a paywall for that. Same thing with the Wall Street Journal if you want the financial news, or if you want to see what's going on in Western Europe and you want the Guardian, you've got to get that. And by that time, you're like, you're just paying over and over and over again, and you're not getting what you feel like you need in one place.
Yeah.
And so the way that this app is going to work, at least right now, and you can download it, there are links on our links blog, and it offers a 14-day free trial. But I mentioned in our headlines, and I'm going back to my notes here, some of the players who are involved are the New York Times, The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, The Guardian. I mean, here, Ernest, it's sounding like everything you're saying you're already reading. And The Telegraph are among some of them. I believe Der Spiegel is also in it as well. And if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head, it's looking at something like £6 or £8 a month. So right now it's in British currency. Don't ask me to do the math that quickly. Yep. But it's also powered by AI. So in some ways, it's looking at your behaviors. It's almost kind of that same idea of the recommendation engine that Netflix would use in determining what content from those sources to feed to you.
Yeah. So I'll be the wet blanket on the idea.
Okay, you are the design guy.
And here we go.
Okay.
Basically, the economics don't work out on apps like this. It's going to be a curated selection of stories. So it's not going to be every story from Reuters or The Guardian or The Times, because that doesn't work out for the publishers. It's $60 a year-ish in US dollars.
Thank you.
And I looked it up.
Okay, thank you.
And the problem is when you have a set selection of sources and you're only allowed to use a certain number of stories from each source per day, my question is, what is the value of the AI at that point? Because they're already curating, and then from that curated list, they're going to propose to you stories that you might like. It's a pretty small set of stories to start with. So it's not that it's not a good idea. I love an app like this that was comprehensive. The problem is the economics force it to be constrained so it doesn't compete with the partners. And that's where it falls apart eventually.
So and ultimately you're going back to what you were doing anyway. This is just another $60 you're taking.
Skimming and browsing, you still have to go to the Times for like the 5 stories you're missing. So there's
which
a
at
fear of
5
missing
stories hits the paywall.
Hits the paywall.
For the month.
Yeah. So there's a fear of missing out for all consumers, news consumers. You don't want to miss, but you also want that convenience of going to one spot. Those two needs are incompatible.
And it's the convenience part. I mean, and I think it's convenience there. I think it's the same issue that people are griping about with the streaming services. I mean, at some point, you're going to have people they're gonna cut the cord on something because the cost becomes prohibitive.
You're seeing that right now. Paramount is just merging its streaming service with Showtime. HBO's merging its streaming service. Netflix is crashing because the economics of that give you everything and charge you a little bit just doesn't work for content.
Okay, well, I'm going to provide an editorial opinion as an oversubscriber as to what is making Netflix. What the problem for Netflix is that everybody else has created their own streaming service and taken their content back.
Yes.
Which has now led Netflix to have nothing but Netflix created and funded programming, which kind of like you have 1 or 2 or 3 shows you want on Netflix because everybody else cannibalized them by taking back the rights to their own programming.
Which is driving up their costs and their expenses, and they're restricting password sharing and everything we liked about it.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that could be a whole other topic for another day too, about how they're going about that. Before we go, the Associated Press managed to make a little bit of news this week itself with how it bungled the announcement of a change to its style book, which ended with the Associated Press having to apologize to, wait for it, France. Ernest is laughing. Late Thursday, it tweeted a recommendation telling journalists to avoid using the word "the" in situations where it might be dehumanizing. Some of the examples: the poor, the mentally ill, the disabled, the college educated, and the French. Now, Ernest is laughing again. Of course, sometimes it isn't enough to just leave bad enough alone. They came back apologizing for inappropriately including "the," and the Associated Press deleted the first tweet and posted a new one, leaving out any reference to our friends from France. Now, don't ever say the French. Oops, I just did it there. Don't say that people from France don't have a sense of humor. The embassy posted a tweet. The French embassy. The embassy from France in Washington, D.C. posted a tweet changing its name to the Embassy of Frenchness in the U.S. I guess there is such a thing as taking ourselves too seriously.
Good for the embassy for having a sense of humor. I mean, to give AP some credit, they were obviously trying to show that the stereotyping doesn't just need to be a negative stereotype. They're trying to show it's positive and a negative stereotype.
So that was love for the French.
They were trying to say, we're just going to be fair. Well-educated in French, it was trying to be their balance. They're both siding the question, right? It didn't work.
No, this is one of those things where the style book, and those of us who are in journalism, you know all about the AP style book. And this is one of those instances where you kind of want to go to whoever's putting it together and say, what were you thinking?
So talk about that, though, for a second, Ernest, because we also talk about how we're using language, using person-first language, and some of those other examples are actually pretty good examples there. Does this become kind of one of your examples of like, let's not take this too far?
Well, yeah, it does. It can. I mean, I think you're right.
Does this replace your Star Wars, unlearn what you've unlearned?
Yeah, it can. But I mean, I think Damon has a point. I think they were trying to show that there are instances where this can be good, but I think the example they use is where they begin to have some problems, and again, they need to really think about that before they put it out there.
Well, we are out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. Read more about each of the topics we talked about today on our links blog. You can find that under both the programs and podcast tabs at kbia.org. We're also available wherever you get your podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our programs, see what we'll be talking about next time, and more. Thanks to Travis McMillan for directing today's show, Kyle Felling for handling the audio, and Tim Pilcher for our theme music.